Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Nick and Noah into unbelievable home where love, fidelity, fear, and despair collide in the most disturbing way imaginable, because what starts as an attempt to cover the people they love turns into a horrifying crime neither man can ever escape. It all begins with a secret so dangerous it threatens to destroy lives, reports, and the fragile peace holding Genoa City together. A secret Matt ever uncovers when he overhears a discussion no way meant for his cognizance, a discussion that ties Nick directly to a cover-up involving commercial sabotage, illegal nets, and a buried reproach that could shoot him to captivity and shatter Sharon, Faith, and the entire Newman heritage. Matt, reckless and fueled by resentment, confronts Nick late at night, drunk on power and information, hanging to go public unless he gets what he wants, and when Noah suddenly walks in and realizes the graveness of the situation, fear sets in as tempers flare, words are changed, and one violent push changes everything ever. Matt hits his head, collapses to the bottom, and lies eerily still as the room fills with silence broken only by Nick's ragged breathing and Noah's rumored terror, and in that moment of pure shock, the sisters believe Matt is dead, forcing Nick to make the kind of split alternate decision that defines a continuance. Rather of calling the police, Nick's instincts scream to cover his son, to cover his family at any cost, and as Noah looks at his father with fear and trust, Nick convinces himself there's no other way out, that the verity would destroy them all, setting the stage for a plan so insane and innocently twisted it'll stain their souls ever. They wrap Matt's body, cargo it into an auto under the cover of darkness, and drive far outside Genoa City, the weight of guilt growing heavier with every afar as Noah begins to question whether his father is right, whether this is really the only way, but Nick's voice is firm, commanding, driven by terror rather than reason. At an insulated patch of land, they dig a grave with shaking hands, the sound of the shovels striking dirt echoing like a death judgment, and just as they prepare to lower Matt into the ground, he gasps, revealing he's alive, slightly conscious, his eyes fluttering open in confusion and pain. Fear explodes as Noah freezes in horror, soliciting Nick to stop, to call for help, but Nick's fear takes over fully, induced that Matt will expose everything if he survives, and in a moment that will define him ever, Nick makes the ruinous choice to silence Matt for good. He tells himself Matt will no way make it, that it's formerly too late, that this is mercy compared to captivity and disgrace, but deep down he knows he's crossing a line that can no way be uncrossed, and as they bury Matt alive, his muffled cries fading beneath layers of dirt, Noah breaks down fully, blubbing, realizing his life has just been resolved into a head and later. Back in Genoa City, the fallout begins incontinently as Sharon senses commodity is deeply wrong with Noah, whose agonies, fear attacks, and unforeseen pull-out raise intimidating red flags, while Nick tries to maintain control, throwing himself into work and pretending nothing has changed, indeed as guilt eats him alive from the inside. Meanwhile, Matt's exposure triggers dubitation, with Chance still continuing old lines, noticing inconsistencies, and making together the timeline, while Phyllis, ever perceptive, picks up on Nick's strange jest and starts digging, induced he's caching commodity explosive. Noah spirals further as the memory of Matt's voice haunts him, replaying in his mind until he can slightly serve, and when he eventually confesses to Allie that commodity terrible hacked, the verity threatens to come out, putting Nick in a position where he must choose between silencing his son or facing the consequences of his conduct. The pressure reaches unsupportable situations as Chance closes in, Sharon confronts Nick about Noah's internal state, and Victor begins to smell that his son is involved in commodity far darker than a simple mistake, setting up a ruinous Newman family showdown. Nick, torn between guarding Noah and accepting responsibility, starts unraveling, visited by fancies of Matt clawing at the dirt, while Noah struggles with the consummation that his father, the man he doted, is able of committing a monstrous act in the name of family. As secrets crack and alliances shift, the question looms over Genoa City like a storm pall: will the verity eventually face, or will Nick and Noah be dragged indeed deeper into falsehoods, blackmail, and blood to keep their secret buried? One thing is certain, this crazy plan has changed everything, and no bone involved will ever be the same again, because in the young and the restless, secrets no way stay buried ever. Nick and Noah have done begins to rot them from the inside out, manifesting in paranoia, explosive wrathfulness, and moments of raw vulnerability that hang to expose the verity at every turn. Nick becomes a man at war with himself, swinging between fierce determination to cover his son and crushing guilt that leaves him gaping blankly into space, visited by imagined sounds of dirt collapsing and a man heaving for air, while Noah descends into a curl of guilt so violent it physically sickens him, causing tremblers in his hands, insomniac nights, and unforeseen fear attacks that Sharon cannot ignore. Indeed, as she desperately wants to believe her son is simply overwhelmed by life and not carrying commodity, far more minatory on his heart. Sharon's motherly instincts edge as she notices inconsistencies in Noah's stories and the way his eyes outrage whenever Matt's name comes up, and though Nick tries to assure her with half-trueness and rehearsed calm, she senses a wall between them that is no way was ahead, a wall erected from falsehoods and fear, and that consummation still terrifies her. Meanwhile, Victor Newman begins to observe his son with the calculating intensity of a chess master, picking up on subtle changes in Nick's jest. The unforeseen guard, the way he shuts down exchanges that veer too close to the history, and Victor's instincts tell him this is no ordinary mess. This is commodity that could annihilate the Newman conglomerate if it ever sees daylight. As Chance digs deeper into Matt's exposure, he uncovers unsettling suggestions that refuse to line up neatly, including security footage that mysteriously cuts out at crucial moments and substantiation statements that contradict one another, and although he doesn't yet have evidence, his gut tells him this was a simple walkaway or accident, pushing him to still question people who are close to Matt, intentionally tensing the mesh around Nick and Noah's necks. Phyllis, fueled by curiosity and dubitation, inserts herself wherever she can, poking holes in Nick's defenses and noticing the pressure between father and son, and her grim delving becomes another source of pressure that Nick can slightly repel, especially when she casually mentions that people do and just vanish without leaving commodity before. Noah's guilt reaches a breaking point when he returns to the point where Matt was buried, driven by an willful need to see it again, to confirm it's real, only to collapse in gashes as recollections flood tied back with brutal clarity, and in that moment he realizes that no quantum of denial will ever abolish what they did, setting off a chain of events that could doom them both. Back in Genoa City, cracks form within the Newman family as pressures rise, with Victoria seeing commodity out and questioning Nick's erratic opinions, while Victor begins to still place himself to contain whatever disaster he believes is coming, indeed if that means immolating his own son to cover the family name. Nick, feeling cornered, doubles down on control, prompting Noah to keep his mouth shut and reminding him of what they stand to lose. But every word only pushes Noah further toward emotional collapse, as the youthful man struggles with the consummation that silence makes him complicit in murder. The pressure intensifies when Chance finds substantiation placing Nick's auto near the burial point on the night Matt dissolved, and though it's particular, it's enough to shoot Nick into full-bloated fear, leading him to consider drastic measures to ail the disquisition, including manipulating substantiations and using old favors, conduct that only consolidate his moral dissent. Sharon's reservations eventually explode into battle when she demands the verity from Nick, criminating him of destroying their son from the inside, and though Nick refuses to confess, his response tells her everything she needs to know, leaving her shattered and furious, torn between guarding Noah and doing what's right. As Sharon pushes Noah to open up, he comes dangerously close to confessing, his voice breaking as he admits they made a terrible mistake, only for Nick to intrude at the last alternate, steering the discussion down but knowing he cannot keep this up ever. The emotional stakes shoot when Noah starts sabotaging, skipping work, segregating himself, and making reckless opinions that alarm everyone around him, and Nick realizes that his original plan to cover his son may actually be destroying him rather. Meanwhile, creepy rumors begin circulating about Matt's last known whereabouts, including whispers from a wanderer who claims he heard riots in the forest land that night, and though utmost dismiss it as gibberish, Chance takes it seriously, reigniting the disquisition with renewed intensity. As the walls near in, Nick contemplates turning himself in, featuring about ending the agony formerly and for all, but Victor's nipping advice reminds him that concession would not only destroy Noah but also unleash consequences that could devastate generations of Newmans, enmeshing Nick between two unsupportable choices. Noah, overwhelmed by guilt and nausea at the falsehoods, intimately records a videotape concession, intending to come clean if anything happens to him, a move that could blow everything wide open if discovered, while Nick grows decreasingly unstable, snapping at those closest to him and making opinions that alarm indeed Victor. The pressure reaches a boiling point when Chance formally questions Noah, pushing him to the point as precisely drafted falsehoods deteriorate under pressure, and though he manages to avoid confessing, his jest only strengthens Chance's reservations. Sharon, seeing the verity slipping through her fritters, takes matters into her own hands, following Nick one night and watching as he visits the burial point, a discovery that leaves her shaken to her core and forces her to defy the horrifying reality of what her family is involved in. As secrets bleed into the open, alliances shift and commitment are tested, with Sharon torn between turning Nick in and guarding Noah, Victor preparing contingency plans that could interlace others, and Chance inching near to the verity with every step. Nick and Noah's relationship deteriorates under the weight of what they partake, transubstantiating from a bond of trust into one of resentment and fear, as Noah begins to see his father not as a protection but as the man who dragged him into hell and locked the door behind them. The emotional climax builds as the possibility of discovery looms larger than ever, raising the intimidating question of how far Nick is willing to go to keep the verity buried, and whether Noah will eventually choose redemption over fidelity. In the end, the young and the restless delivers a nipping memorial that despair types destruction, that love twisted by fear can come commodity monstrous, and that no matter how deep the grave or how precisely the falsehoods are constructed, the verity has a way of clawing its way back to the face, promising that this shocking plot is far from over and that the fallout from this crazy plan will change Genoa City ever. Nick Newman, a man formerly deified as a protection and pillar of the Newman family, now stands on the cliff of moral ruin, visited by the memory of Matt heaving and clawing at the dirt as they buried him alive. Each day after the incident, Nick's heart becomes a battleground, with studies of Matt's suffering replaying endlessly in his mind. He begins waking in cold sweats, reliving every push, every muffled laugh, every hopeless plea for mercy. The pretenses that carried him through the first night, the fear of jail, the protection of his son, the desire to save the family name, begin to deteriorate as he starts realizing that no sense can undo the monstrous act they committed. Meanwhile, Noah is plunged into an ocean of guilt and terror, a youthful man who doted his father now forced to reckon with the fact that his idol is able of the unbelievable. Every sound in the house makes Noah jump, the creak of a floorboard, the dinghy of a canine, indeed a late night auto passing the Newman estate, sends him twisting back to that terrible grave. He begins segregating himself from musketeers, avoiding academy and work, skipping refections, and sinking into a nearly inexpressive state of fear. Sharon, noticing the drastic change in her son, grows decreasingly anxious. She notices his concave eyes, the way he flinches at unforeseen noises, and the constant earthquake in his hands. As a mama, she suspects trauma, but trauma alone cannot regard for the depth of fear she sees. Sharon, ever determined to help, tries to get Noah to open up, to partake his burden, but he's trapped in a web of silence, both out of fear of his father and the tone, loathing that grows stronger with each passing hour. The cerebral torment isn't limited to Nick and Noah alone. Victor Newman, ever the calculating primogenitor, senses the dislocation in the family's equilibrium. He notices subtle shifts in jest. Nick's erratic moods, his overzealous focus on work, his tendency to avoid his father's questions. Victor, seasoned in the art of power and manipulation, begins still observing, placing himself in the position of a master strategist. While he doesn't yet know the full extent of the crime, Victor knows that commodity dangerous is spoiling beneath the face, a secret able of tearing the Newman conglomerate piecemeal. He subtly pressures Nick, testing him, probing for sins, all while orchestrating contingencies to cover the family should the worst case script unfold. For Victor, this isn't just about morality, it's about power, control, and survival. Back in the megacity, the exposure of Matt sets off a chain response of dubitation and disquisition. Chance Chancellor, Matt's longtime friend and confidant, notices inconsistencies in substantiation statements and timelines. The fact that security footage mysteriously cuts out during critical moments, coupled with unexplained gaps in defenses, intensifies Chance's dubitation. That commodity far more minatory than a simple exposure has passed. Chance still begins retracing Matt's way, canvassing musketeers and associates, and making together the fractions of the night in question. Though he has no concrete substantiation yet, the mystification pieces point to one conclusion: someone close to the Newman family knows further than they're admitting. Meanwhile, Phyllis Summers, ever perceptive and frequently suspicious of the Newman men, notices the strange pressure between Nick and Noah. She begins probing Nick, asking pointed questions about his whereabouts, his mood, and his relations with Matt before the exposure. Phyllis's grim curiosity creates farther strain on Nick, forcing him to employ every ounce of his cunning to redirect her reservations. Each taradiddle, each calculated smile, each controlled pause becomes a dagger driving him further into moral decay, a memorial that the act of covering up a crime is frequently far more psychologically sharp than the crime itself. Noah, formerly teetering on the edge of despair, starts passing visions brief, intimidating fancies of Matt clawing through dirt, heaving for air, screaming for help. These fancies are so pictorial that they bleed into his waking life, leaving him convinced that Matt is still alive, trapped, suffering, and calling for him. The cerebral risk becomes unsupportable, causing Noah to entrust an ally, a friend he trusts. In a moment of nearly complete breakdown, he begins to allude at the verity, stopping just suddenly, of full concession. This moment, though transitory, underscores the growing internal fracture within the Newman family, a fracture that Nick senses and fears will soon tear them piecemeal. Nick himself becomes decreasingly unpredictable, torn between paternal instinct and moral mindfulness. He begins lashing out at associates, musketeers, and indeed family members over minor cuts, projecting his inner guilt and anxiety onto everyone around him. His formerly commanding presence now carries in turnabout of despair, a man who knows that every commerce could lead to exposure. Agonies persecute him as well, each replaying the moment Matt was buried alive in excruciating detail. Nick wakes screaming, soaked in sweat, pulsing in his bed, and yet every time he contemplates going to the authorities, a surge of fear paralyzes him. He knows that confessing would destroy Noah's life, ruin the Newman heritage, and shoot him straight to captivity. The weight of that knowledge drives him further into immoderation, further from redemption. The dynamic between father and son begins to deteriorate under these pressures. Once clicked by love and respect, Nick and Noah are now bound by secretiveness and fear. Arguments erupt over the lowest issues, frequently raising to crying matches and moments of violent emotional violence. Noah, hopeless to assert some control over his own life, begins defying Nick's orders in subtle ways, trying to reclaim agency over a situation that has left him feeling helpless. Nick, meanwhile, interprets every act of rebellion as implicit trouble to their secret, farther straining their relationship and raising the stakes for both of them. As days turn into weeks, whispers about Matt's exposure begin to circulate throughout Genoa City. Rumors face of a man screaming in the forestland late at night, of a suspicious vehicle spotted near insulated areas, and of Matt's last known movements being inexplicably obscured. Utmost dismiss these rumors as coexistence or magnification, but Chance takes them seriously, reigniting his disquisition with renewed vigor. Every indication he uncovers, no matter how small, is an implicit thread leading straight to Nick and Noah. This ever-present threat creates a constant state of pressure for the Newman men, a pressure cooker in which one misstep could unravel everything. Sharon, seeing the verity inching near, begins taking matters into her own hands. She follows Nick one night, shadowing him as he drives through the darkened thoroughfares, and ultimately discovers the burial point. The horror she feels upon seeing the disturbed earth, the remnants of their crime, and the intensity in Nick's eyes is nearly unsurprising.